Okay, so I'm going to talk about geo-conservation, past, present, and future.
There you go, Colin.
Brilliant.
Sorry about that.
Try again. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I'm Colin Prosser. I worked for many years for Natural England on geo-conservation, and when I was asked to come and talk to you about it, I thought, well, great, fantastic, and then I started looking around your website, and I've known a number of you for many years, and I'm aware that you're already doing a great amount of work, a great amount of practical geo-conservation work. So I thought, well, what can I talk about? So I thought what I'd do is a more sort of sweeping talk about sort of context for geo-conservation, what's going on widely, and how the work that you did sits within the whole geo-conservation movement, how it's changed from past to present, how it might change into the future. So I'm going to give you a whiz through. How did we get to where we are? Where are we? What might we be doing in the future for geoconservation? So where did it all start? Well, it's sort of arguable where conservation started, but wildlife conservation, some say, started with the Normans and their sort of hunting forests. They were designated and protected to look after the wildlife, not so that it would thrive so much, but more so that it was there for them to hunt, the right people to hunt. But more realistically, it was into the Victorian times when people started to be concerned about the killing of birds, taxidermy, shooting birds, and the use of birds, particularly in clothing. So sorry if anyone's got a hat like the one over on there still. It was birds and hats like that really started quite a movement, and legislation started to be passed towards the end of the 19th century. And at the same time, we had the National Trust established in 1895 and the Society for the Promotion of Nature Reserves. So people were starting to get interested in nature conservation. But what about the first ever examples of geological conservation? Well, again, no one really knows, but the widely quoted example is this Bauman's Hole in Germany, which was a show cave, it still is a show cave. And a decree was passed there in 1668 to protect the features within the cave. Again, because people thought it was a wonderful thing, but also they were probably making money out of people being shown around, so they wanted to protect it. So, yes, conservation, but the motivation for it is perhaps questionable. The earliest British examples, up in Edinburgh, there was petitions to stop the quarrying of the Salisbury Crags. And again, this was more aesthetics, and because people were interested in the geology, they didn't want to see the sort of landscape destroyed. There's the 1872 Committee on Boulders. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. There's the Erratic Blocks Committee, which some of you might have been in and have an understanding of, because there's been recent projects in this area around looking after erratics. Wadsley in Sheffield, I'll say a little bit about, and then there's a famous fossil grove in Victoria Park, which is featured here. It's interesting to see that the tree stumps there from 1887 were protected indoors, and you can pick out the individual stumps, and they're still there today. So the Committee on Boulders, up in Scotland, 1871, David Milne Hume started this initiative. He was a Scottish advocate, landowner, geologist, meteorologist, and all-round activist. And he's painted here with the boulder of his choice. And he put together a committee, and this is very clearly about conservation. They have set up a group to work out where remarkable boulders are situated. Of course, they're very interested in erratics at this time and understanding glaciation. And they were very successful in mapping out these different boulders. But the second part, what they wanted to do was to identify those who were preserving and requesting the landowners and other influential people not to break them up. These erratics have been broken up and used for high core and for wood, etc. I think it's true to say they were much better at the first bit, the mapping of it, than the actual going out and talking to landowners and getting them to act differently. But it always makes me smile that the Boulder Committee included amongst them the Lunacy Commissioner for Edinburgh, which is a good start for geological conservation. And it becomes even more amusing when you get to the Wadsley example from Sheffield from 1873. This is the first proper example in England, and it took place in the South Yorkshire County Lunatic Asylum. Work here to level ground, again, encountered interesting coniferous tree stumps, and Professor Sorby was called in to the asylum and instantly pointed out on the spot the desirability of preserving the larger specimens in situ. So there's a relationship to the strata which we see. So that link to strata is really important. They decided to build sheds around them and to protect them in that way. And you can just turn up at the asylum, seek the keys, and go in and have a look at these stumps. And you wonder whether the people in the asylum wondered about the people who are coming in. Stumps really as well. So there you go. So again, these stumps are still available. They're covered with tarpaulin and gravel these days, but they are protected and they are opened up every now and then. But it was much later, 70 odd years later, that conservation really took off. During this wartime, 1940s, the government were thinking about the green and pleasant land and the land fit for heroes, and what do we want to do with our landscape? And they started to think about conservation planning. And they set up a nature reserves committee. And luckily for us, with an interest in geology, they decided they needed to set up a subcommittee to look at geological reserves in which is what they did. They had a small group of key people appointed by the Geological Survey or the Geological Society. They sort of listed their big names at the time. And they tapped into other geological advisors that were around at the time and basically drew on their knowledge and expertise. And again, it's worth noting that within their report, they were holding their meetings during the attack of doodle bugs during the end of the Second World War. Very, very briefly sitting there to talk about geology on some landscape. This report, it pointed out that the foundations of geological science were developed in this country and that the evidence of this should be protected for students for all time. They highlighted that geology is more robust than wildlife, but that if you don't look after it, it can be damaged or obscured unless looked after. And the country should feel pride about this. A lot of our geology is internationally famous, and we should look after it. And they went on then, between them, to list 390 sites which they thought might be suitable for conservation in the future. 390 in England and Wales, and 2 on the island of Man. This is a report, nice sort of 1945 patina on it. And this is a list of sites that came up for Warwickshire. I don't know whether people have seen these before. Interestingly, you've got the canal cutting near Shirley, where I went today. So that was there from day one as a potential site. Again, I don't know if you know all of these sites, whether or not they exist. Woodlands, I think, is a triple SI as well. So some have carried forward, but some may have disappeared. But that is what the great minds at the time in 1945 thought the Warwickshire site should be. So this was followed by a report in 1947 to government, again saying people don't generally understand about geology and physiography, as they're calling it, geomorphology. Highlighting again that we've got this great diversity of geology in this country, the British geologists were pioneers, and that there are many classical sites that need to be protected, and they're visited by people, students from around the world. Interestingly, they also highlighted here that our beautiful scenery and our living carpet of wildlife is derived from geology and me. So they're seeing very clearly that link between geology and wildlife. And I think that's got lost a little bit of time since then. And they say the government should take responsibility for protecting these sites of special biological, geological, physiographical, and other scientific value. So that's the thinking of the scientific community at the time. And that passed on to the first legislation. This was really pivotal. This was really important because I really believe if the geologists at the time hadn't influenced this to get geology into this legislation, it would be very difficult to fit it in the years after. I think it would become wildlife legislation and getting geology into being very difficult. But this is the first national nature conservation legislation anywhere to include geo-conservation. An organisation was created to implement it. It's the same legislation that allowed for our national parks, sites of special scientific interest, and national nature reserves. And basically, again, it just said where the Nature Conservancy are of the opinion that an area of land is of special interest, because of its flora, fauna, geological, physiographical features, it should be the duty to notify that to the local planning authority. And the idea was that if the planners knew it was there and it was important, they wouldn't develop it, they wouldn't damage it. So 1950 saw the appointment of the first geologist to work on this new legislation. William McFadden, he was a Cambridge graduate in chemistry and geology. He'd served in both world wars and spent the rest of his time in the Middle East, North Africa, as a geologist, hydrologist. And he joined, as I said, in 1950. He had this new legislation, a list of 390 sites. He had no staff, there was no guidance as to what to do, and he set off on the task. So between 50 and 60, he set about this in a very sort of rigorous scientific way. He's a very thorough person. He visited all of the sites. He did index cards, which are shown there, although you can't read much of it. But he did a card for each site he visited. He listed the key references, why the site was important, who the landowner was, what condition the site was in, for example. Very thorough, and he photographed the sites and linked his notes to these photographs, and they form the basis for the designation of over 600 geological sites of special scientific interest that he did. So he had the list that was produced earlier, but then other people coming forward with new sites, and those sites coming from Scotland. Somebody said we haven't got a cave, so a lot of caves came forward. So he was hitting a moving target all the time. He also declared national nature reserves and retired in 1960. And a lesson which all of us, I think, will know, he intended, before he retired, to write up all of these sites in books. In 1970, 10 years after he retired, he actually managed to get the description of those sites just in the southwest end and the rest of them. So that was the start of wanting to write up and publish the important sites. So between 1960 and 1990, there was a period then, all of these sites were being designated. There was an increasing number, and this meant that every time someone wanted to develop them or do some work on the sites, it was creating work, consultations, discussion. And that's basically what the government and conservationists were involved in doing, dealing with these, trying to protect the sites that come forward. Also, in 1977, it was decided that we needed to be more systematic about the sites that were protected. The initial list was really some sites that came off the top of the head of the specialists of the day, the real experts. But he thought this should be done in a systematic way to make sure we've got everything in a coherent way. So the Geological Conservation Review was initiated to do that. The Wildlife and Countryside Act was also passed, and that involved every existing site to be redesignated as sites, but this time telling the landowners about their sites and giving them a chance to object to it and explaining to them why the site was important and giving them a list of activities that would need to consolidate. So it's a much more thorough bureaucratic exercise to do. So the emphasis at this time was on designating sites and on protecting these sites, and it started to include education, trails, trying to get people to be aware of why they were there and why they're important. Very briefly, the Geological Conservation Review, many of you will be aware of this. It involved key geological specialists, and basically it was a sort of doomsday look at all of the geological sites that were being protected. Most of the work was done between 1977 and 1990, but it is still updated. And academics and people from an industry who knew particular periods of geological time, particular fossil groups or structural sites all came together to identify in a systematic way the best sites to illustrate the geology of Great Britain, making sure that they're picking up anything that was internationally important, anything that was really unusual or exceptional, and then representative sites that told the story. And there are approximately 3,200 of these in 2010, possibly SSIs in Britain. And it was the GCR sites that underpinned the designation of the SSIs. They provided the scientific justification for protecting them. Sites were published in a series of volumes. And also, right up to today, they're being published in the Proceedings of the Geologists Association. Those that haven't yet been published, where authors never managed to finish the task, or where there's been massive changes in scientific understanding. So there's this ongoing process of putting the scientific justification for protection into the public. So we get to 1990, and there's a sort of feeling then that we have the best geo-conservation framework in the world. There's no doubt about that. Britain was way ahead because of its legislation experience. But it was based on these SSIs, which were only protected for their scientific research value. It was top-down, government-led. These all came from the Nature Conservancy and its successor bodies. There was the universities involved to some extent. There's no recognition of locally important sites. If it wasn't of national importance for science, there was no protection. There was nothing for educationally important sites or sites of landscape value or historical element. There wasn't much of a geoconservation community. It was largely the people who were working in government to protect these sites. Low levels of public understanding, not a lot of engagement, and not much support. And it was felt that a new approach was needed. And some of you again may remember this exercise. There was a big consultation, lots of people pulled together to say, well, what do we need to do? What are the priorities? How can we come together in Britain to do more with our conservation? So the themes of this were maintaining the SSIs. We've got these, we needed to continue to look after them. But very importantly was this idea of expanding the RIGS network, the local sites, for the first time to start to get a series of sites, county-based, which would be protected, identified by local groups that would still be protected. There was a need for thinking about new approaches to conservation. How do we look after faces? How do we look after soft faces? What approaches do we need to take? We need to understand the sites we've got a bit more. We need more documentation. We need more public awareness. And internationally, there's starting to be some flickers in other parts of the world showing an interest in conservation, and we felt that linking up with other countries would be really beneficial in doing this. And this was the thrust of the strategy, with an appendices which provided tips and guidance on how you go about practically conserving the sites. So where have we got to now? So I'll whiz through this because, again, I think a lot of you will know. We've got local geological sites, or RIGS, which is a big focus for the sort of work that you do and other groups do. As a structured series, this was initiated in 1990. There's about 4,400 sites offered some sort of protection through the local sites RIGS schemes and the planning system. They have selection criteria which are much broader than the SSI, so it gives you that chance to pick up educational sites. There's places where you can engage with people and share the joys of geology. Historical or aesthetic reasons can come into it. And of course, as I said, these are driven by local groups such as yourselves, whether they're trusts, they may be local communities, there's been Champions Initiative and other geo-conservation groups. And there's also been coordination over the years and still from Geo-Conservation UK and the Geology Trusts to help share experience between different groups and support the members. And although it's dated now, the work that had been done there did lead to the government engaging, coming in and producing guidance on local sites, their guidance on their identification, selection and management. And it's that really sort of brought local geological sites into the fold with local wildlife sites and gave them some sort of policy recognition. We've talked about the SSIs, the backbone of geological conservation. We've got a fantastic series here. There's 221 in England, which is about 25% of all SSIs, underpinned scientifically and robustly by the Geological Conservation Review. These sites get strong protection. It doesn't mean they're totally immune to damage. There are still threats, there's still damage and loss, but there's a chance with all of these to get involved in consultations and trying to protect. In interest, a few years ago, the government produced it's called their environmental improvement plan, and we persuaded them as part of this to report on the condition of geological sites. And in 2019, which is the data there in the dark blue at the bottom, we did assessments which showed that 60% were in favourable, good condition. Others were not very good but recovering, others were not very good and not recovering, others were not very good and getting worse. Stroke damage. But 20% of sites hadn't been assessed properly for their condition. And it was this information that convinced the government to fund some of the work that's been going on over recent years on monitoring the triple sites to try and establish their condition, which I think we've probably been involved in, as have many groups. So it's shown that having data can really sort of make a difference and convince government to do certain things. And you can see there that the amount of unassessed sites has dropped drastically up to 2025, going from the dark blue to the light blue on there. And the number of favourable sites is sort of fairly similar. That's where management is maintaining the features. So national nature reserves, worth a quick mention as well. A national nature reserve is different from an SSI in that a national nature reserve is the land is acquired and managed with nature conservation as primary purpose. Triple SIs often have other purposes. It might be a canal cutting, or it might be a quarry, or it might be road cutting. It's not managed just for its nature. National nature reserves are. So there's a number of national nature reserves which are purely geological. For example, quarry there up in Stoke, and relatively recently, a year or so ago, we had the Broadgate Park National Nature Reserve declared as well. So that's extra addition of sites where there's a great chance to promote and protect geology. And what's been happening in the last few years is that we've been trying to sell the story within Natural England that we can use the National Nature Reserves to tell the full geological history of the planet as far as Britain goes. So there are a number of geological National Nature Reserves which tie in particular periods. For example, the Wren's Nest there ties in with the Wenlock and Silurian, tells that little bit of the story. But there are also many other national nature reserves which are declared for their wildlife interest, but also have a lot of geology in them. And by putting these together, we're trying to sort of fill out and be in a position to tell the story through national nature reserves of the geology. Now, this has meant there are some gaps that need to be filled, and this has given us an opportunity to try and push the designation of extra sites. So later this year, we're hoping to designate Leckhampton Hill as a national nature reserve, which is a coastal site which will bring more Middle Jurassic into the series. Now, since King Charles came in, it was decided there would be 25 King Series NNRs designated, and some of these have started. We've recently had things like the Borrowdale Rainforest, which again includes geology. Bradgate Park in Switzerland Wood went through that as a King Series site, as will be Leckhampton. So it's given a bit of extra profile and a bit of extra impetus for those people who manage these sites to go for national nature reserve status. UNESCO geoparks, these are large landscapes with internationally significant geology. Many of you will be aware of these. Very importantly, they're about using nationally important geology for social and economic benefits. The idea is that they're used for education, for tourism, for giving people a sense of community. And it's been a really successful initiative. From the year 2000 and on, we're now up to about 230 there across 50 countries. And in all of these places, there's rigorous assessment of the geology. They're evaluated every 3 or 4 years, re-evaluated to make sure they're doing new things that are engaging with people and they're promoting their geology. And this is having a real influence in raising awareness. Roughly, 2023, just to get you a feel, that's where the UNESCO geoparks are. Again, it's a big, rigorous process that has to come from the bottom up. Local authorities or national parks or somebody who wants to do the work to build the case to do this. And we've got a focus like Europe, it's quite a lot in China and Southeast Asia, there's quite a few now in South America and Central America and in Canada. Due to relationships with UNESCO, there's nothing in USA or Australia, but it's starting in Africa as well. So it's getting on. As I sort of closer up of the European ones, there's many in Europe, and if you're on your holidays somewhere, you might want to look up the local geopark because there'll be visitor centres, museums, and there should be some really good experience for you. As a reminder, that if you didn't know, those are our current UK ones. As I said, they're assessed every 3 or 4 years. They can get a yellow card if they're not deemed as doing all the things that they're meant to be doing, or if they're appalling, they can get a red card and be kicked out of them. So there's sites in Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales, and they're all listed there. And there's 2 more in the pipeline. These are the sites currently being assessed by UNESCO. They've been building up to this for years. They've been through assessment in the UK and the UK Commission to UNESCO, and they've been submitted in for consideration. Chandler Forest and the Cross-Channel Geopark, which is an innovative one linking up the geology of northern France with that, particularly the chalk of southern England. These will be assessed over this summer. A decision will be made in November, probably, and then but it won't be endorsed until next spring. So these 2 new sites can come in. There's obviously some politics with the English-French side coming in, but it's a very good application. And we've got our UNESCO World Heritage sites. Again, the two in the UK with really strong geology, Jurassic Coast, and again, people doing stuff to promote geology and to conserve geology. Something you might not be aware of is the International Union of Geological Sciences over the last few years have been looking to promote really important geological sites. And they produced, again, through very rigorous assessment of this 4 years ago, they call it the first 100 geological sites, 100 sites across the world, which are really important for their geology. And there's a booklet that comes out after, as I said, there's rigorous assessment, they're evaluated against each other, and they decide which sites can fit in. Second point was the very first site in the very first 100. So they produce a book which you can download, which has got all of these sites in, and again, really, really spectacular places. We have the second 200, so I think the second 100 or so go, and the next 100 will be coming up in later this year, so there'll be 300 sites identified. These are the sites that have gone through the system at the moment to be nominated. They're either going through academic geological societies or different routes that get nominated into the system and assessed there. Some of those you were surprised at, some of those you might not have heard of. But again, it's a new thing, it's giving international profile to geological heritage. And it's worth mentioning to the ProGeo, the International Association for Geological Heritage, which now exists and is really quite active. Established in 1993 as a European job. It is promoting in all sorts of places across Europe and the world the importance of geology. It acts as an advocate, trying to influence policy. It produces symposium newsletters and establishing geoheritage. Put the website at the bottom. Anyone can join this, and it's a really good way of finding out what's going on internationally. And you get their newsletters, you can put your activities in the newsletter as well. They'd be very pleased to hear about anything that you've done, and that gets international coverage. Of course, other stuff is going on. Management, monitoring, enhancement. You all know very well about that. There's some really good initiatives going on, some really great site clearances going on, such as the things you're doing. Up in Cumbria, they produced a really good action plan and engagement with different bodies for what they're trying to do in geo-conservation. Work done through different routes. Isn't it? This is sites that were cleared using agri-environment money, and your very own John Bradley was involved in coordinating this, but very importantly, not only enhancing the site, but writing it up and publishing the scientific findings. Raising public awareness still continues to be really important, and again, site clearance, but with interpretation. It's all very well and good to enhance the site, but people need to know why it's important, why people are bothering to do it. And again, I flagged the Champions initiative, which is such a good way of getting ordinary people, non-geologists, people who have perhaps not had any knowledge of geology previously, involved in studying the subject. And there's lots of activity going on, sharing techniques, documentation now. There was nothing 20 years ago, really. You've now got PGA publishing lots of geo-conservation papers. There's a journal, Geoheritage, which churns out papers about the subject. You've got textbooks. You've got guidance produced there, and you've got IUCN getting involved in guidelines for geoconservation in protected areas. So there's lots of information out there that didn't used to be. And again, this is just a sort of reminder for anyone who doesn't know that Natural England a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, put out an updated guidance on geoconservation practice. Based on all the different types of sites there, whether the coastal sites, limestone pavements, natural exposures, quarries, road cutting, and the different approaches. And most of the information in here was gathered from learning from activities that groups such as yourself have done. These are there as a whole series of sort of examples to make you think about how you might look after forests or not. Any sorts of different sites. With examples of, for caves and karsts, what things might look like if they're not recovered, and what things look like if they're really well managed. So that's there, but also with real case studies, and that's all free to download if anyone wants that. 10 at this point. So I will now talk about future challenges and opportunities, and some of this will be obvious to you, it'll be stuff that we've all pondered a little bit. But we are living in a changing world. We've got growing populations, we've got demands for natural resources, demands for land to develop, and there is increasing government influence. I was talking to Stuart about this in the car earlier, with money tending to come for specific projects. It's sort of ring fencing. Okay, so here's some money, go and do something interesting with it. So here's some money to do this particular project. And that can be positive and negative. Biodiversity, wildlife is still has a very dominant profile in conservation. Geology and geo-conservation is still low. Our sites there's still a lot of threats out there, and climate change will potentially add to some of these, and we just need to think about it. There's new technology, and there's an increasing need to be able to provide a sort of proper context as to why you're doing what you're doing. Exactly right. I'm interested in geology. Why? I want to conserve sites. Why? Who benefits from doing that? How does this make other people's lives better? We've got to start to address those points. And I also flag up this growing international interest in geo-conservation. I think that's going to provide some scope and some opportunities to try and engage. We'll go through some of these. So what have we got to do? What might we do? Well, I think we have to work the political agenda. So this government came in and they're very, very interested in growth. And Natural England were put in a position where they sort of say, well, if you want some money to do nature conservation, how's that going to contribute to growth? I'm not sure that objecting to things and stopping people to develop things are going to contribute to growth, is it? So you can see Natural England have produced a strategy, and it's not about nature conservation for nature. It's not about geological conservation for geology. It's about recovering our nature for growth, health and security. It's the package the things that they want to do and how they do it into these headings in order to get the funding and the government to go ahead and carry on in existence. So I think we have to find ways of working with the political agenda. And an example of this, nature recovery, it's been a big thing that's come from government. Nature recovery is great. There's money for nature recovery. There's certain things you can do. We can tap into this. The Purple Horizons project was one of the few projects funded initially for nature recovery, and the idea was about restoring heathland in particular, in sort of South Staffordshire into sort of Birmingham area, and it changed the Sutton Park area. And this was going to involve clearing some areas to create bare sandy soils for heathland to establish. So this overlapped with the Black Country UNESCO Geopark a little bit, and because there were some responsive people within the Purple Horizons project, they were willing to listen. The argument was, yes, this project, this money is about heathlands, but the heathlands don't create there because of the sandy soil. The sandy soil is there because of the perma-Triassic rocks, and they're there because of the sort of geological history, the environmental changes that have taken place. So why not tie in a heathland with an understanding of why the heathland's there? So there's been a site here at Shire Oak for a while. You can see there, 2002, there's some exposure, 2015, it was going, and by 2021 it had gone. They agreed as part of the Purple Horizons project to completely re-clear this, create a new habitat for different insects, etc., but also exposing the geology. So as you've got that geology exposed to link through to you, And as part of that, they funded a couple of signboards. This is one at Bar Beacon, Sands of Time, making that link, using money that was primarily targeted for Heathland to do geological projects. I mean, again, it's about playing the game, fitting it. I didn't want to mention nature recovery strategies, but I thought it showed you who's got a view on. But the wording of nature recovery strategies, which are meant to take place in every county, is very much geared to one way. But I'll just say that some areas of the country, some groups, some local groups managed to engage with these and get some geology into it, as geology is part of nature. But I think other areas it's been very difficult. So if anyone wants to tell me about that, I'd be interested to listen. But again, that's a big thing that's going on. Nature recovery strategies and their chance, if you can engage with those, it's a way of getting geology on the local agenda. Climate change, again, is a big issue, as you'll be aware. I think geology has two areas where you can engage and make it relevant. Your own panel here talks about the past environments, and these messages about understanding that our environment has always changed, it's dynamic. If we can understand past environmental change, past climate change, we can plan for the future perhaps. But we also have to get involved in the narratives around the changes that are going on. The Sheppey Cliffs SSI down in Kent, really important for its London clay, fantastic fossils, it's eroding away, it's slipping, and there's continual demands to build sea defences here, protect it, cover it over, because of sea level changes, erosion. You're getting across this message that our environment is dynamic. And again, you've got a house here, which is getting, despite the fact the house is called Cliffhanger, there was real upset and outrage when the cliff started to slip away and the property was undermined. Another area of importance is getting the definition of nature right. And quite often things come out and talk about nature, but when you talk to people, they don't mean nature, they mean biodiversity. And there's been a couple of attempts recently. Natural England's strategy talks about we had to fight very hard to get something to try and define what nature is so that people realise. It says that nature is diverse wildlife, stunning landscapes, flowing rivers, dynamic seals, and soils and geology beneath our feet. So, it's not brilliant, but geology's there. It gives you that hook to say, actually, if you're talking about nature, you need to do something with geology. This is another example. Dave Stone is a chief scientist at the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, and he's been very supportive of geology, did an article highlighting the definition of the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy up to 2045. It says nature includes biodiversity, geodiversity, and the natural elements of landscapes and seascapes. It encompasses all the underpinning features and forces, etc. Since the Earth was formed, summit to seabed, including rocks, landforms, soils, and processes. If you've got a definition like that and someone's talking about nature, you ought to be able to hook your geology. Again, we need to keep raising awareness and engaging communities. There's no getting away from it. Without getting that support up, it becomes very hard to do things, whether or not that's with children, charters that work with government and companies, or whether or not it's champions initiatives, or innovative things such as this site, footprints and dinosaur in Spain. Just a reminder that that's 1977, new scientists, front cover, preserving Britain's geological sites. We need to get more of that sort of publicity and coverage too. And again, it's coming back, your panels are doing this brilliantly, and initiatives such as the erratic boulder stuff, again, is great because it's taking the geology into very urban areas. And just a reminder, this is Peterborough, and where I live. there's a dinosaur. It's a cat. It's just arrived in the cathedral. This will get massive interest. People will come pouring in to see this and pay to see it. We've got some brilliant things with dinosaurs, with volcanoes, with stories of the past, and we need to remember that and use it to let people. We need to continue to protect and manage our sites. List of things there that we all know about: what loss of exposure to burial, vegetation, damage from quarrying for irreplaceable features such as caves, irresponsible collecting, damage from disruption of natural processes, and even accidental loss from ignorance. One of the biggest things that can happen. People not know it's important. And again, illustration, many of these threats, whether or not it's very hard coastal protection obscures the geology, even softer attempts results in the geology disappearing as the vegetation encroaches. Neglect, stabilisation, health and safety works is one of the commonest covering over geology, and non-fill, which is Webster's claim bit there in the commentary. And increasingly, and again, sorry if this is one of your trips, but increasingly, certainly in certain parts of the world, numbers of people turning up and tourism is starting to be a threat to some geological sites. It's only going to be a bigger issue in the future. So we need to keep protecting, enhancing and monitoring sites. And again, I've been to these places today, absolutely brilliant condition. More of that is what's required. Having plans for what you're doing, having plans to engage with people and doing works like that is absolutely fantastic. Technology. I think technology is important, but only where it's working and it's relevant. So this is again human quarry you saw earlier. We started using drones on some of these sites, and you really do start to get a different understanding of the geology. Being able to get to places and see the condition features that you might not otherwise see. So again, at the moment, not everyone's got access to drones to do things or all the other technologies out there, but certainly worth considering. We did have an issue, and I think it was informed this one, and some couple, shall we say, were out in the quarry, and they weren't spotted at the time, but they picked up in the drone footage. So again, an appeal. There's a growing evidence base out there, understanding of geo-conservation. So there's loads of information there, should you need it, but equally, the production of these things and the science itself, practical action, needs to learn from what groups are doing. So do be aware of it, and do try and contribute. Go back to relevance. It's really important that you're showing the relevance of what you're doing and why. Increasingly, organisations have been asked to say, well, how is what you're doing contributing to these sustainable development, UN sustainable development? And I went to a talk that Ian Stewart gave, and his statement was, if you can't at least show how your geology and your work you're doing is contributing to some of these, you end up in getting any support, funding, any sort of political buy-in. So these are what society is thinking about. They're worth bearing in mind initiatives. And again, you see UNESCO here, they're trying to show the value that their designations and geoparks and sites bring to society. What does it bring in? Jurassic Coast takeaway there. It's not just about geology, it's about the added spin-offs that come from it. And there's been a number of projects looking at how financially different sites and different activities contribute. So finally, the last few things, tapping into what's out there. You've got your geopark program out there. There'll be lots going on in geoparks. At the very least, there'll be people in geoparks who serve as speakers, provide you with information, guidance, field trips. Aaron became a Scotland became a geopark last year, and I know already a number of bodies have contacted them, organising some really nice trips up there, latching on to what's there, but learning from the geoparks, engaging with the geoparks. You've got International Geodiversity Day, the 6th of October every year. If you're doing something on or around then, it's a chance to promote it. You can put your activity on their website and it gets international profile. Other things UNESCO are doing, they're doing training events for people who aren't geologists to try and teach them about geology and how they might manage geology in their UNESCO sites. And they've appointed a UNESCO chair of geodiversity and geoconservation, and they've got a whole series of initiatives going: networking, capacity building, best practice, communication. And they're also doing a series of lectures which are going on YouTube. You can see two so far, and this most recent one was Chris Clear, some of you might know, who was at the National Museum of Wales for many years, talking on museum collections of geoheritage. Nice talk. So there's things out there going on. ProGeo, I mentioned earlier, the International Association. Anyone can join and get loads of information. It's their journal and also their websites. They're very happy to have information. And then the Dorset group, the Dix group, here put on information about Clear's work that they've been doing. So to conclude, this sort of sweep across time and activity. The UK has been a global leader without doubt in geoconservation, thanks to the pioneering work of However, it's been caught up. We've been caught up by other countries now. Spain in particular are really active, but there's so much stuff going on elsewhere. We've got legislation, we've got some policy support, we've got so much experience, particularly locally. That's something that people in other countries don't have. They do not have groups such as yourselves who've got this fantastic level of experience of doing things on the ground. And they always come to the UK for wanting to know about practical management experience. Another theory, site selection approaches, but the theory of actually, the practice of actually doing it, it's not so strong. We've got lots of challenges still for geoconservation, but a lot of them apply to conservation generally, to society. This increased steer by government can be difficult because money only comes with certain tasks. But if we can be relevant, make ourselves relevant and focus on this, you can tap into these tasks, such as I said for the Horizons project, you can make geology part of what they want to do. And internationally, there's this extra activity going on now. So there's quite a lot of influence coming from quite a lot of activities going on, and things that we can perhaps create new opportunities for with these new site types. Key geodiversity areas, actually, mentioned that. Oh, I lost a slide actually there. Key geodiversity areas is a new initiative, which is that IUCN is asking countries to identify big areas of key geodiversity. So we haven't seen how that pans out, but that again could give opportunities. IUCN also did this Meaning of Nature report, again trying to argue that nature is includes. So all of this international activity is providing a number of other opportunities. So we need to sort of latch onto these and see where we can go from there. So I should leave it there. I hope that sort of sweep was of some interest and helps put your brilliant work that you do locally from a practical point of view into a broader context of what's going on. Thank you.